So welcome today. Very, very excited to present Helen Disney. She is actually the CEO and founder of Unblocked. Basically, she's also a huge innovator, been listed as Women in Fintech and a powerhouse leader in blockchain. We are pleased to welcome her, and Helen, please take it away.
Thank you so much for having me. Well, just a little bit about my background, really. So I have spent the last, 9 years working in the cryptocurrency and blockchain field. It began with a big Bitcoin event, actually Europe's largest and first Bitcoin event in 2014 in Amsterdam. Previous to which I had no connection with the technology world, no knowledge of cryptocurrency or Bitcoin, but that event really launched my interest in these technologies. And what particularly interested me is how they can potentially make a big social impact on our world. So we have a lot of problems today in business and in society, which tend to stem from things being centralized. And what I found very interesting about blockchain and Bitcoin is that they are decentralized technologies, and therefore they can potentially help us solve problems in different ways and allow us to share information and value in a much more seamless and frictionless and secure way. So that's really how it all got started for me. Prior to that, I was a journalist. I worked in policy world. So I had a career in really influencing ideas. And I think the blockchain industry is still at the point where we need to influence ideas, because most people don't really understand still what blockchain is or what the potential of it is. So I've kind of turned those communication skills and event management skills and other kind of policy influencing skills I had from my previous career and brought them into the blockchain scene. So it's great to be here today, and looking forward to answering some of your questions and hearing what people have to say from the audience as well.
Thank you. That's helpful. So yes, you are definitely ahead of the curve. You're definitely an innovator. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here. Can you tell us, I mean, in layman's terms, what is a blockchain? Some people, are not as familiar as you. So if you could start there.
So there's many ways to describe blockchain, but the simple way that I use to describe it is it's a shared network for the secure exchange of value. So when we think about a blockchain, it's a distributed ledger, which means everybody has access to the same information at the same time. It's secured by cryptography, so people can't access the information unless they have the key to open the door, if you like. And we can exchange value in that way. And that could be different types of value. It could be money, but it could also be other assets of value.
Okay. And then as far as a token, if you could give us a basic layman's term of what you think, would be a token.
So a token is really a digital representation of value. And there are different types of tokens, as I mentioned. That could be money in the form of a cryptocurrency. It could be proof of ownership. So recently people have been talking about non-fungible tokens, which is proof of an ownership of a rare item, for example, or your intellectual property. Or it could be access to a network. So a utility token could allow you to access a network that has something that's valuable to you that you want to do or be part of.
Okay. And as far as yourself, I know getting women and diversity into, blockchain and crypto, the future in general. What are you doing to kind of bring people in?
So I'm part of various networks, which I think really help to make women feel more comfortable being involved in the blockchain industry, because it has been a male-dominated industry. So I'm part of a group called the Bigger Pie, which YIP is also part of, that helps really what we call expand the pie for women in the industry. So that means opening up job opportunities, speaking opportunities, confidence building, information sharing, lots of other different types of activities like that, helping people get access to finance for their businesses as well, which is crucial. I've also been the host of a number of events. When we still had physical events, we were doing Women in Blockchain networking sessions prior to London Blockchain Week and London Fintech Week, because I'm based here in the UK. And I'm also a mentor, so I'm involved in a group called the Global Thinkers Forum, which is not specific to technology, although it has a technology focus, but it's focused on women entrepreneurship and empowerment. And so as part of that group, I've mentored 2 young women who are both building careers in blockchain and help them to develop what they're doing further and hopefully share some of my expertise.
Can you, describe what is the purpose of Unblocked, your program?
So Unblocked, I set up in 2016 because I saw that although people in the industry are very passionate about what's happening in blockchain, most other business leaders and policymakers didn't really understand what it was or how it related to them. So it's an education, events and content platform for people that want to understand blockchain and also other frontier technologies, because blockchain is a foundational technology, but its real power will come when it's also connected with other technologies like AI and Internet of Things, so that we can bring together the benefits of the tracking element of blockchain, which gives us this kind of audit trail or this sort of diary of events that's going on, with also the ability to then apply that information using data analysis or using sensors to be able to, let's say, improve the supply chain or share healthcare data better. So lots of things we can do once we have the information sharing, we can then start to apply that and add value in different ways.
What are some of the challenges you see coming up in the blockchain industry? It seems like so many people are now getting into crypto. As you said, NFTs are huge. We'll go into that in a bit. But what do you think some of the biggest challenges are now that everybody's getting involved?
I think there are still risks for people that don't understand how to safely navigate this world. So I think because there are lots of very new innovations. I mean, decentralized finance is one where people are starting to democratize investment, which is great. So anybody can kind of purchase and trade and make money out of cryptocurrency, but a lot of people don't necessarily understand the risks. They need to keep their private keys safe, and they need to understand the providers that they're using someone trustworthy, and they can be scammed and defrauded. So I think that is still a risk from the consumer perspective. And that needs work. I think also regulatory uncertainty is a huge issue for people building the businesses. We still have a lot of variation between what one country says versus what another country says, both in terms of legality, but also definitions of how different tokens are kind of described and defined. And that makes it very, very difficult if you're launching a business. And obviously, some businesses still can't even get bank accounts because cryptocurrency and blockchain is viewed with a lot of skepticism and kind of mistrust. So I think those are probably the biggest challenges from the kind of entrepreneurial point of view.
If you were just starting out, say a woman of the future, what books would you recommend, or how would someone go about getting more information?
So I do provide a big list of resources on my website. There's a resources page on the Unblocked platform. There are lots of kind of broadly accessible books. Don Tapscott wrote a great book called Blockchain Revolution, which I think gives a really big picture of what blockchain is and how it can be applied in different use cases. There's also some fantastic books on slightly more technical, but still accessible. Andreas Antonopoulos has done a great job, I think, of understanding Bitcoin, understanding blockchain. And there are master's courses. I mean, obviously this course is providing great information. There are quite a few master's programs now and educational courses people can take to understand the fundamentals. And I think it's very difficult to start if you don't have the basics. So for me, first of all, I had to understand Bitcoin. Then I sort of understood from that there was applications of blockchain that were more to do with enterprise and kind of outside of necessarily cryptocurrency directly. So I think you kind of need to start from the fundamentals. And then once you've got that fundamental base, there's so much more you can learn. But if you don't really get to the heart of how blockchains work and the different types of blockchains, it's hard to then add to your knowledge. So I would kind of say try to start from some reading, join some networks so where people can answer your questions as well. I think personal connections with people in the space can really help as well, as long as they're people that are truly expert and not just claiming to be experts, which is a lot of quite a common phenomenon. And I would still say myself, even though I've been doing this for 7-8 years, I wouldn't say I'm an expert from a technical point of view, but I'm probably an expert at explaining this on a layperson's level that they can understand.
Yes, it seems you're highly regarded in the industry, especially within, obviously fintech and, the blockchain space. You've been, written up and you've been talked about and highlighted. So I would consider you an expert. So I'm not that humble to bring it back and be like, no, she's not. Yes, she's.
Well, I think it's how you define expertise. I mean, I'm not a programmer, I guess is what I'm saying. I don't spend my days, creating blockchains and programming. So, I can't create a smart contract. I can't, do the technical things behind the scenes. But I think we need more translators and more communicators. So I'm not sort of trying to do myself down, but merely to point out that the translation and the communication piece is important. And if you're asking questions, make sure it's from someone who genuinely knows their stuff.
What do you think in life? What is your biggest fail?
That's a hard one, that one. No one ever likes to admit their failings, do they? But I think for me in my professional career, failure to delegate has been a big one. And I think that's probably quite a female trait. Sometimes you want to sort of keep all the control, but actually, we're talking about decentralized systems here. And actually, decentralizing yourself is an important thing to do. But then when you do that, also hiring the right people, because I have in the past, in my desire to delegate, then kind of hire the wrong person, put a huge amount of faith in that person. And if that person's not the right individual for the job, then that almost takes you not just back to square one, but you're almost in a worse position. So I think that's sometimes why people don't want to delegate, because they think, well, if I do, something might go wrong. But you have to have the courage to delegate if you really want to scale what you're doing.
And sometimes single females don't have anyone to delegate to, right?
Well, that's the other problem.
Yeah,
and it's also how to delegate, because sometimes you sort of overcompensate in your desire, so you'll sort of become too bossy, or you'll become, too laissez-faire. So you just say, I'll leave that one, with that person, and you don't provide accountability mechanisms for that person to report back to you on what they're doing. So it's not just delegating, it's how you delegate as well. I think that's a really important part. It's kind of learning the skill of delegation.
Well, I know we have some great questions here coming up. Can you see the screen, or you want me to ask?
Yes, I can see some questions here. So I see that Yip has asked about different use cases. So the kind of events that I run with Unblocked are less about the financial side, which is what tends to get a lot of press coverage when it comes to blockchain, but more about different verticals. So we go into things like healthcare, supply chains, creative industries, environmental issues, and philanthropy. So how is blockchain changing the world of charitable giving and that kind of thing? So those are some of the big picture kind of use cases we have looked at in the events. And then within that, there are obviously kind of subcategories. So if you look at healthcare, it goes right from the beginning, if you like, from the R&D side. So it could be improving transparency of clinical trials, or helping people who do pharmaceutical research make the best use of data, which may not get commercialized, but could be shared with other researchers, through to right to the kind of user end, to our end, if you like, to the individual. So us being able to have access to our own healthcare information at the touch of a button on a phone or on a desktop, rather than it being in the hands of the healthcare provider, that we should hopefully democratize access to our own healthcare data, because that benefits our health, and we can improve our quality of life by knowing what's going on with ourselves. And often we don't have that in the current kind of healthcare system. It tends to be still very centralized. So, that's sort of a range of things in health. In supply chain, it tends to be things like provenance, so knowing where goods come from, being able to improve the supply chain and turn it not just into a supply chain, but really a value chain. So being able to have much more granular information all the way through about what's happening to something as it moves around the world. So a good example from recent times is a distributed ledger platform is tracking storage of the COVID-19 vaccines in the UK NHS, because they need to be kept, obviously, several of the vaccines at a very low temperature. So you need to have compliance and make sure that we know exactly what temperature the vaccines are stored at, how many are left, how many are being transported, and make sure we don't waste any, because obviously once they're no longer at the right temperature, they have to be used quickly.
And then does that prevent the fraud as well, I guess? So,
yes, potentially also preventing, because obviously we saw at the beginning of the pandemic a lot of fraud around things like PPE and so on. So there was a rush from governments to purchase items, and then it turned out that a lot of money was wasted on goods that weren't really appropriate for the use. And so again, being able to know exactly where something's come from, who's manufactured it, who's paid for it, those kinds of things, we can start to have a much more robust and transparent supply chain.
Absolutely. I think that's a great question. I think there's a couple more for you.
Yeah, so someone's asking, how would you pitch to a government to adopt the new economy, the token economy? What's important and what happens if they miss this opportunity? So that's a really, really good one. So I did work a lot in public policy, and the first rule is that, everybody's time poor these days, because we were all got information overload, but policymakers generally have a few minutes to kind of listen to you or make a decision. So you have to be very simple and very quick in your messaging, and potentially you can go into more detail later, but you've got to capture people's attention first. And I think the way to do that with policymakers is to explain, what these technologies can do for the public good. So, of course, policymakers want to support new industries that were going to bring jobs, that are going to bring innovation, because that's good for the economy. So that's one angle. But it's also about them as policymakers or as providers of services. How could they embrace these technologies to improve what they do? So I talk quite a bit about, improving the relationship between the citizen and the state. How can we actually involve citizens more? If we're talking about money transfer, the systems that we use are still very slow and cumbersome because you've got to prove your identity in a manual way often in order to get access to funds. There's a possibility of fraud again, as we saw with business loans during COVID. So being able to set up systems where, you can really see the money flow and you can get this audit trail of what's going on, but then also the user can feed back to the system. So it's more of a two-way process. And I think governments are starting to wake up to that. I did some research over the last 2 years through a platform called GovChain Research that I set up with a partner, supported by various people in the industry. And we looked at how governments around the world are using blockchain and whether they're kind of on green in terms of being adopters or whether they're sort of, just exploring, which we ranked as kind of an amber color on a traffic light system, or whether they were skeptics. And there are many countries that are starting to explore different use cases for the government. So it could be land registry. There's a lot of admin and processes involved in that can be streamlined using blockchain. There's welfare services. There's things like, car registrations, vehicle registrations, potentially tax, obviously.
I heard that you can pay taxes in certain countries, I guess.
Yeah. And obviously government's also looking at things like central bank digital currencies, should they have a digital dollar, a digital euro? I think recently Christine Lagarde said it would be sort of 4 years until Europe had a digital euro. So things are moving quite fast.
I was going to say, what is your benefit, or what do you see as the benefit of the countries starting to create their own systems or own tokens, digital currency?
Well, I think there's a few benefits. I mean, there's obviously, as I mentioned, the benefit of much smoother money transfer and also transparency of where that money goes. So if you just think every year what a nightmare people have when it comes to kind of taxation, doing their tax returns, the interactions you have. I don't know about other countries, but I'm sure it's similar to the UK.
Sure.
You speak to HMRC. No one knows exactly where this money went from 3 years ago and which account it's gone into, and it got, misplaced and filed to the wrong reference number and all these kind of things. So, there are many things like that we can streamline and improve from an administrative point of view, which I think, partly is just digitization. It's not necessarily blockchain, but I think being able to have an identity that is linked to you and where you can start to combine different government services together would save a huge amount from the individual kind of citizen point of view, because we still have to go, to a post office or a physical place. And obviously with COVID, this has all become much more difficult. And we still have to produce pieces of paper every single time. And it's not just once, it's multiple times. So you've got to do it for your driving license, then for your passport, then for if you've been burgled, then for applying to secondary school, then for all these different things. And so if we had one single government issued blockchain-based ID, we wouldn't have to keep on proving who we are all of the time. And in an online world, that's the first thing we have to do if we want to interact with anyone, is have trust. And blockchain gives us that kind of trustless ecosystem where we don't need to worry about trusting the person, because we can actually prove who they are and prove we've interacted with them.
Gotcha. Let's see, Yip has a couple more questions.
Yeah, so the bottlenecks for adoption and frustration. I think I get frustrated because I'm still answering the same kinds of questions I was answering, 8 years ago. Still have to explain, what is Bitcoin, what is cryptocurrency, what is blockchain, that it's not just about sort of fraudulent activity, but there's actually this huge positive movement and wave of innovation going on. I think often people are much too tentative. So the other thing that happens is you get pilots. So going back to government schemes, you get sort of positive noises and you get sort of short-term pilots, but then there's not really longer term commitment. So I think the countries that are doing really well are the ones that are being very ambitious and showing leadership and saying, by this date, we want all of our X activities to be on blockchain, or we're going to invest this much money in not just blockchain, but in frontier technologies more broadly, and realize that they're connected as well. So it's not about having a program on AI and then a separate program on blockchain and a separate program on smart cities and then another one on this and that. All of these things are part of the same phenomenon, really. So we need to have much bigger vision. And that's what gets me frustrated sometimes. I think we have a lot of short-term thinking, from business people and from policy about, this is just another technology, it's another sort of technology provider. It's not, it's a fundamental shift in how we operate as a society, and sort of getting people to understand that is not easy.
So it's more the futurism and I guess connecting the dots to all of the other pieces is what you're saying, put that in with artificial intelligence, put that in with the new systems, put that in with the new fintech programs. I guess that's what you're saying.
I think it's having more of a vision about, what can be done. And we have to invest in all of these things together, really, and try and think, even if we just think of 2 or 3 problems that we could solve and try those out. And then if that works, great, then we can expand it to other things. But there's not really a willingness at times to, throw out the old ways of doing things. It's a lot of piecemeal innovation. And we could achieve much more if we went for the kind of step change innovation.
If people want to get in touch with you, once again, if you could give it, obviously, your website, your email, so, obviously they can follow back up with you. I want to make sure that we give you a little bit of a plug here.
Definitely. I'd love to be in touch with anyone who's got questions. So my website is un-blocked.co.uk. Email is helen@un-blocked.co.uk. I'll put it in the chat as well. We're also on all the social media platforms. So you can find us on LinkedIn. We're on Twitter and Instagram as Unblocked Hub. Always happy to connect with anybody.
Great. No, I certainly do appreciate that. I see a couple more questions for you down there. If you want to pick one.
Most challenging questions you receive from people involved in blockchain or wanting to adopt it. I think there's 2. One is, what kind of blockchain should I be using? Because obviously now we have a whole marketplace of blockchains. We have the public blockchains like Bitcoin, but there's also many different enterprise blockchain solutions out there. There are kind of new era blockchains, if you like, which aren't really blockchains as such, like Hedera or IOTA, which are really more distributed ledgers rather than blockchains. And that's a sort of fine distinction that people may not really understand. So they achieve consensus in a different way. They don't keep the entire history of the transactions like a public blockchain like Bitcoin. So it's sort of navigating that whole complex marketplace, I think, is one thing. And then the other is really, actually when you look into it, what can be done. So these technologies are still emerging. So often someone has a great idea for, let's say, a decentralized application built on a blockchain platform beneath it, and actually work with a company like this who had a fantastic idea for music streaming. But in terms of actually getting their idea working fully, it's taken them 2 years of technical work. They've had to create an entire kind of new piece of technology to actually connect what they wanted to do with the underlying blockchain platform. So it's not always as straightforward as it seems, even though in theory it can work on the technology and the idea is there. Actually, just knowing that you're going to need quite a few years roadmap in terms of funding and being able to be ambitious enough to go out and raise that funding and say, I don't just want, 500,000, I want 3 million or 5 million. I think that's something that startups tend to maybe also be a little bit timid and they should be bolder.
You mentioned too about the bigger pie that you're in with Yip. I believe I'm in the group as well. If you want to talk a little bit about that and what that is, in case people want to hear a little bit more about it.
So the bigger pie is a community where there's a website and there's also a very active WhatsApp group. And in that group, we share information for women in blockchain about opportunities they might want to take up. So we encourage, for example, more female speakers at conferences, because we often see technology events where there's not great female representation and we want that to change. also sharing, educational opportunities, interesting events that are going on, funding opportunities, chance for people to find mentors or be mentors for other women. So there's an awful lot of kind of useful information sharing, and sometimes it's just knowledge sharing. People have questions they want answers to, because we're all still learning in this industry and people are specialized in different areas. But it's also a great way to just make friends and contacts and expand your network. And at times you don't necessarily know why that's going to be useful. And then, 6 months down the line, you're looking for a marketing or PR expert, or you're looking for someone who knows about exchanges in Bahrain, or, there's some question that you have that you want answered, and you'll find that there's someone in that network that is able to connect you or answer your question. So I find it incredibly useful myself, and think it's a really important
women, females that do that. And then we have obviously Unit. So you can come either place, find out, a great network. I think that's, one of the great things. And that's why I actually joined Unit, was the quality of people and the network. And I think the reason that we joined, obviously the bigger pie, same thing, is it's a quality of people, quality of network. And then I know there's a couple of additional questions.
Yeah, I think someone's not on mute. If the person in the background could put on mute, that would be great, because it's a little bit of noise from the background. So additional question is, isn't central bank digital currency just the same thing? It doesn't stop the money printing. Why would any country make themselves more accountable and be forced to operate more like a business and less like a money hole with no traces?
Without printing. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, that is a good question for governments. I think, they are challenged by the concept of central bank digital currency, because it will provide more accountability and transparency potentially. But I think also, what's happening is that they're being forced into it. It's not that they necessarily want to do it, but the advent of, for example, Facebook's Libra project, which has now changed its name to DM, but organizations which have as much, if not more, power than governments, like some of the largest technology corporations in the world, will launch their own, digital currencies or money transfer facilities. The tech fins are becoming sort of bigger than the fintechs in terms of their incursion into the financial services world. And would governments rather control their own money and be able to do that, or would they rather have a corporation doing it? So I think that has been one of the biggest drivers. And also, I mean, Western governments again may be more tentative about doing this, but China's been working very hard on its digital currency project for some time, and there may be limited features of what can be done with it. Not necessarily all central bank digital currencies will have the same functions, but I think it's something that can't really be avoided. And there is a potential cost saving for government to do that. It does benefit them in some ways in terms of tax collection and administrative and kind of behind the scenes functions. But it also obviously provides a kind of greater insight into what they're doing. So it has its risks from a political point of view.
If you had a dream, Helen, I mean, what would you really see, I guess, Unblocked doing with everything that's going on in the future? What would be your dream?
Yeah, I would love to see this really accelerating, because I think, for the past 7-8 years, it's been quite a lot of talking and some action. I would like it to be, mostly action and much less talking. So the goal of having Unblocked was not necessarily just to educate and just to provide content, but to use that to accelerate change. So for me, I think that cryptocurrencies and blockchain can empower women much more, particularly in developing countries, but all around the world, to have access to finance, whether for their business or for their personal growth. I think it can have a huge impact on stimulating people to use renewable technologies and improve the environment. I think it can have a big impact on how we manage healthcare and how we improve our health and well-being. And I think it can help content creators and creative people and journalists, actually, as I used to be a journalist, take back control and be able to actually make money from what they produce and prove that it's their own work. So those are the kind of big picture things for me, the reasons why I got into blockchain and why I care about it.
Are you doing any hiring recently with interns or anything like that? I know we are at Unit looking for a couple of great interns for content development, for web marketing, for many different areas, especially marketing, social media, etc. Are you doing any hiring?
Yeah, I mean, we'd be always happy to take CVs from people that are interested in working with us. We are expanding what we do in terms of content creation. We're building a course at the moment on storytelling and marketing for entrepreneurship. So I'm definitely going to need support with that. So if people are interested in that side of things, we'd love to hear from them. And obviously events are all online for the moment. We tend to have event volunteers when we had physical events. And if we go back to that, again, always great to have people come to the events to help out, but also they get a lot of learning and opportunity to network at those events. For now, it's virtual, but still virtual events require behind the scenes work. So I'm sure you all know putting on this program. So yeah, do get in touch if you've got something that you can offer and you want to send your CV.
Yeah. Guess we have some more questions here.
Yeah. If I may jump in, Helen, while
Sure.
we're having you here, being like a long-term expert or activist in the field, would you want to share with us your favorite use case, as in, what is actually working and what is not working, so we can help our audience understand, what is actually already real action and where is only talk and what would need to happen so that the talk turns into the action that might help? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, in terms of real adoption, obviously finance is probably the biggest area. People are every day purchasing cryptocurrency, trading, being able to make higher returns from doing that than they would if they had their money in an ordinary bank account. And I think that's very valuable. And it's not just wealthy people, it's all kinds of people around the world who are able to do that now and able to send remittances home to their families much more cheaply, for example, than they would if they were using traditional money transfer remittance companies. So those are really important things. We are seeing real world applications in supply chain, particularly in provenance. I've got an event coming up in a week or so with someone who's tracking seaweed provenance in Indonesia. And that might seem like a really esoteric thing, but most seaweed farmers are women, and most of them don't get paid well, or sometimes don't get paid at all for what they do. And the seaweed also has huge kind of economic and environmental impact because seaweed can sequester carbon. So the more seaweed we grow, potentially the more carbon we can actually take out of the atmosphere. So it's those kinds of projects that are, I think, so meaningful in terms of social impact. There are lots of other kind of things that are mooted that, are much more, I guess, fanciful or, not quite there yet in terms of the vision. So, people sort of say, well, we can have, voting on blockchain and things like that. And there have been some voting projects, but they're not widespread. And, they come back to human politics, which is that, you may go to a country where there's election fraud and you may try to run a trial, but obviously the people that are corrupt running that country don't want the results of the true electronic voting to be made public, and there can be a huge amount of violence and political kind of unrest that results from that. So I know organizations that did try to do this type of thing in war-torn countries, and there were some huge kind of ramifications from doing that. So we have to kind of remember always that technology is embedded in its kind of social context. It's not just, well, the technology can do that, therefore it will succeed. It's about also humans ultimately make the decision about what technology they want to use and how it's governed. So we still have to work a lot on the governance of blockchains and make sure that once we are using them in a more widespread way, that we understand, what that means for us from a personal and kind of ethical and human point of view, because, technology is our tool. We need to use it for our benefit.
Would you want to share your perspective on what is good tech governance? Like, how does it look like if we were to create it based on, how you see the world, the direction the world should be going?
Well, so I think that's a really interesting thing, because when you talk about some of these bigger projects, how are they going to be governed? If it's one company that sort of ultimately owns the technology, if it's a public blockchain, it's still got to be ruled by a set of rules that are made by humans, but maybe it's a private blockchain, so who's involved in the governance of that? And you want to have as wide a and ownership as possible. So looking at something like Hedera, for example, which is one of the new generation distributed ledger platforms, they created a governing council, and they chose to have a variety of corporations all around the world from different industries. First of all, not just the same industry, so it's not a sort of industry cartel, but also public sector and charitable organizations, as well as private companies. So we know when you're looking at some of these bigger projects that could potentially have a massive impact, that kind of thing is really important, because we don't just want, if there's going to be a multitude of different blockchains, them to be run by, one group of people or one centralized body. We want them to be decentralized and controlled by a variety of people, or influenced by decision making from, all of the users in different forms. And the question is, how do you do that? Because if it is decentralized and something goes wrong, you can't have millions of people making the decisions. You still have to have some people who decide what happens if there's going to be a hard fork, or there's going to be, a decision about how the network moves forward from a technical point of view. You still need a core group of people. So it is challenging to come up with those rules, but I think it's about making sure there's obviously transparency. There's a wide variety of types of stakeholders involved. And that, we know what the rules are, and everybody's aware what the rules are who's using that network.
We have about 3 minutes left until we go into breakout sessions. And so I just wanted to see, is there anything that you want to impact with, anybody who's watching right now that, you would like, to have them come, or you would, your dream? What would you like to tell them?
So I think, especially for younger people, you mentioned, what should people do if they want to get into the industry? I think don't be too rigid about it. I mean, yes, of course, you can enter the industry by being a programmer, and you can go and take computer science or engineering subjects. But, I didn't get into the industry by that route. So I came by a very different route, which was using really storytelling and communication skills and influencing skills to get myself into the industry. And, it was my kind of passion for social impact that really made me see why blockchain was important. So, don't narrow it down to just one route. I don't think there's one route into blockchain. And also I really would encourage people to find mentors. I think that's been the biggest things in my career is, you don't get somewhere on your own. You get there by, a multitude of support mechanisms, family, business mentors, personal friends, contacts that you make, people whose ideas influence you through reading and meeting people. So just keep on exploring. If you're interested in blockchain, find the niche that is the most relevant to what you care about. In my case, it's social impact, but for other people, it might be something different. So try and connect blockchain to something that really matters to you. Because I think when you have a real purpose, it's much easier to work hard and get out of bed and do a good job, because you really care about what you're doing.
I love the fact you said mentors. I believe in mentees as well, right? So I think, if you can find someone to lift you up and someone you can bring up along with you, I think it's really important. I know that's what we're trying to do here at Unit. And I think, that's why we brought you in. So I think it's amazing, that we can connect you to, a whole different forum. And then you can obviously help us and be a part to, build the successful women and successful program that we're doing as well. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day today to do this. I know that we're headed towards the breakout rooms in about a minute. But thank you very, very much for doing this. And everybody, once again, it's Unblocked. Take a look at her website and go connect in with her. And once again, do you want to give your email address?
Yeah, I'm just putting that in the chat now. And also the website as well.
So we all have a new mentor.
And mentees are great too. I mean, people that I've mentored, they end up becoming important contacts in the future, because they're usually ambitious people and they will go on to do great things. And suddenly they become not just someone that you mentored to try and help somebody, but actually a friend and someone who's a colleague that you can draw on and work together with. So mentees and former employees become great contacts as time goes on.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I know Yip's going to take it away into our blockout rooms.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.